Have you ever been alone, really alone in the dead of night? The kind of quiet where the air feels thick, where every creak and sigh of an empty building makes your heart race. I thought I could handle the night shift. I always imagined the stillness of the night would be peaceful, an easy paycheck, a bit of solitude. But I was wrong. So wrong. It started about a year ago when I took a job as a night guard at a small medical center on the outskirts of town. The place wasn't huge, but it had a reputation for being strange. Old, run down, with most of its wings no longer in use. It used to be a full-fledged hospital, but years of budget cuts had turned it into little more than a skeleton of its former self. The few rooms still in operation closed by 8 p.m, and after that the building became mine. I thought it would be easy. I thought wrong. My first night was uneventful, and that's exactly how I wanted it to be. I was used to working alone, not much of a people person, so the silence didn't bother me. Or at least it didn't at first. Around midnight I started my rounds. The corridors felt different at night. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the soft padding of my shoes were the only sounds in the air. As I made my way through the long, empty hallways, I felt like I was walking through a place that had been forgotten by time. The walls themselves seemed to be holding secrets. I made my way down to the basement where the storage rooms were. I don't know why, but I always hated going down there. It wasn't the darkness or the coldness that lingered in the air, but something about the basement felt off. The lights down there were always dimmer, flickering as though they could give out at any second. The musty smell of dust and decay clung to everything. I finished my checks and was heading back to the security office when I heard it. A faint sound, like a whisper carried on the air. I froze, every hair on the back of my neck standing on end. It was so soft that I thought I had imagined it, but it was there, low and quiet, like someone murmuring just behind me. I turned, expecting to see nothing but the empty hallway, but my heart skipped a beat when I saw the door to the pediatric wing slowly creak open. That part of the building hadn't been used in years. The entire wing had been sealed off after a series of tragic incidents involving some of the children who had been treated there. I'd been told never to go in there. It wasn't part of my patrol route. But the door was open now. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I told myself it was probably just a draft, or maybe the door hadn't been latched properly. That's what I told myself as I walked toward the door, shining my flashlight into the darkness beyond. The air felt different as soon as I stepped through the doorway. Colder, heavier, like something was watching me. The pediatric wing was exactly how I imagined it would be, desolate and forgotten. The smell of mildew hit me first, followed by the sight of dust-covered toys scattered across the floor. Old hospital beds stood like ghosts, untouched since the day the place had been shut down. Everything was still, like time had stopped. I was just about to leave when I heard something, a faint sound that made my blood run cold. It was the unmistakable sound of a child giggling. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The giggle was soft, playful even, but there was something wrong about it. It echoed in the stillness, bouncing off the walls and sending chills down my spine. I turned in a slow circle, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There was no one there. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed out of the room, nearly tripping over one of the old toys on the floor. As soon as I stepped back into the hallway, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash. I jumped, the sound reverberating through the empty corridors. My breath was ragged as I stared at the door, trying to convince myself it was just the wind, just the old building settling. But I knew better. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me from that room. For the next few nights, the sense of being watched grew stronger. I could feel eyes on me, cold and unblinking, every time I passed the door to the pediatric wing. I refused to go near it again, but the whispers and the laughter seemed to follow me. It wasn't just in the pediatric wing anymore. No, whatever it was had begun to spread throughout the building. I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows flitting just beyond the reach of my flashlight. Doors would creak open on their own, lights would flicker and die as soon as I entered a room, and there was always that damn giggling. By the end of my first week, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept well in days. My nerves were shot, and the idea of spending another night in that place filled me with dread. But I couldn't quit. I needed the money. So I kept telling myself it was all in my head, that the isolation and the dark were playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. It was a Friday night, and the building seemed quieter than usual, if that was even possible. Something about the silence felt wrong, like the calm before a storm. I was sitting in the security office, trying to distract myself by watching the grainy footage from the cameras, when the monitors flickered. Static filled the screen, and for a brief moment I saw something, a figure standing in the middle of the pediatric hallway. I blinked, my heart pounding in my chest, and when I looked again, the figure was gone. The next few hours were a blur. I tried to shake off what I'd seen, tried to convince myself that the old security system was glitching, but that wasn't enough to explain what happened next. Around 2 a.m. I was making my rounds when I heard it again. The giggling, but this time it was louder, closer, as if it was following me. My stomach churned as I made my way down the main corridor, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, surrounding me. I stopped in my tracks when I heard a voice, a child's voice, soft and eerie, calling from the end of the hallway. "Play with me!" My blood turned to ice. Slowly I turned my head toward the end of the hallway, and there, standing just outside the door to the pediatric wing, was a little girl. She looked no older than 8 or 9, wearing a pale, faded hospital gown. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands around her face, and her eyes were pitch black, like 2 empty voids. She stared at me for what felt like an eternity, and then, without a sound, she smiled. I don't know what came over me, but I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I bolted down the hallway. The giggling followed me, echoing in my ears, growing louder and more frantic as I reached the exit. My hand fumbled with the keys, shaking so badly that I nearly dropped them, but somehow I managed to unlock the door and burst out into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My chest heaved as I sat there, trying to calm down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that little girl sitting in the back seat, her black eyes staring back at me. But the car was empty. I never went back to that place. I quit the next morning, left a voicemail for my boss, and never set foot in that hospital again. To this day, I still hear that giggling in my dreams. Sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, convinced that I'll see her standing at the foot of my bed, waiting for me to play with her. Maybe I will.